Let's go back to the year 2000. Before DDR existed, most computers ran on SD-RAM, and it was slow. You didn't just open a program, you waited for it. Multitasking felt risky. Too many windows open and your system would crawl. Then DDR1 changed the game. DDR stood for double data rate, which meant it could transfer data twice per clock cycle instead of once. That single shift made PCs feel dramatically more responsive. Not instant, but finally reliable. Effective speeds range from DDR200 up to DDR400. Most consumer systems topped out at around 1 GB per stick, which back then was considered serious performance. Early Pentium 4 and Athlon builds relied on it, and if you had 512 megabytes or more, you weren't struggling. But that speed came at a cost. DDR1 ran at about 2.5 volts. For memory, that's high. More voltage meant more heat, and more heat meant instability if your system cooling wasn't great. Desktop modules used 184 pins with a notch right in the center, a small detail that would become very important in future generations. DDR1 wasn't flashy, it wasn't massive, but it marked the shift from computers that barely kept up to computers that could finally breathe. And as software got heavier, games became more demanding, and multitasking turned into the norm. DDR1 quickly started to feel small, so the industry promised something faster, and that's where things get interesting. DDR2 arrived a few years later with a bold promise: more speed, lower power, better performance. On paper, it looked like a clean upgrade. Voltage dropped from 2.5 volts to around 1.8. That meant less heat and better efficiency. Speeds climbed higher than DDR1, eventually reaching effective ratings up to DDR2 1066. Capacity increased too, with modules commonly supporting up to 4 GB per stick. Physically, things changed as well. Desktop modules now use 240 pins, and the notch shifted slightly off-center. That shift wasn't random. It was there to prevent you from installing the wrong generation into the wrong motherboard. Around this time, compatibility stopped being optional and started being critical. But here's where things got interesting. Even though DDR2 offered higher bandwidth, it also came with higher latency. In simple terms, it could handle more data per second, but it sometimes took longer to respond to a request. Think of it like a highway expansion. DDR1 was a smaller road with fewer lanes, but traffic merged quickly. DDR2 widened the highway dramatically, allowing far more cars to move at once. But early on, the on-ramps weren't perfectly optimized. So while overall traffic capacity improved, the time it took for a single car to enter the flow didn't always feel faster. That's why in light everyday tasks, early DDR2 systems didn't always feel dramatically quicker than well-tuned DDR1 builds. But once workloads increased, more programs open, heavier applications running, DDR2 pulled ahead thanks to its higher bandwidth. Under the hood, DDR2 used a 4N prefetch architecture, meaning it could grab twice as much data per cycle as DDR1. That design is what allowed the jump in throughput, even if latency numbers looked worse on paper. DDR2 wasn't a failure. It was a transition generation, built less for the present and more for what software was about to become. And that future arrived fast. DDR3 launched in 2007. Voltage dropped again, settling around 1.5 volts, improving efficiency and thermals. Speeds began at 800 MHz and eventually pushed well beyond 2000 in later revisions. But the bigger shift was capacity. 4 GB stopped feeling luxurious and became normal. Soon after, 8 GB became the standard for most serious builds. For many people, this was the era of their first real gaming PC, the point where performance felt genuinely modern. This was the era when building a system felt like a true upgrade over everything else. DDR3 made dual-channel memory mainstream. 2 matching sticks working together increased bandwidth and improved responsiveness. This mattered even more for systems using integrated graphics. Unlike a dedicated graphics card, Integrated graphics doesn't have its own video memory. It uses system RAM, so running single-channel memory could noticeably reduce gaming performance. Adding a second stick often produced a visible improvement, not just in benchmarks, but on screen. DDR3 was the generation where memory configuration started affecting gaming performance in ways people could actually see. Gaming felt smoother. Multitasking felt easier. DDR3 lasted nearly a decade because it scaled well and matured beautifully. But software kept evolving. Workloads grew heavier, and expectations increased. Eventually, the industry needed something more scalable. By 2014, DDR4 arrived. And honestly, most of us didn't rush to buy it. At first, most people didn't feel an urgent need to upgrade. DDR3 was still performing well, but DDR4 was more than a routine update. Voltage dropped to around 1.2 volts, improving efficiency and thermals. The pin count increased to 288, locking it firmly into a new platform generation. Base speeds started at roughly 2133 MHz and quickly moved beyond 3000 as manufacturers refined the technology. At the same time, capacity expanded, giving modern systems the breathing room newer software demanded. As modern CPU designs evolved, memory speed began playing a larger role in overall system performance. When CPU designs began linking internal communication speed to memory frequency, RAM stopped being background hardware. Faster memory could improve frame pacing. Lower latency could reduce micro-stutters. It wasn't just about benchmarks anymore. It was about smoothness. DDR4 scaled well because it had the headroom to support higher speeds reliably. That's one reason it lasted as long as it did. DDR4 matured into a powerful and reliable standard. It handled gaming, streaming, and video editing without strain. For years, it felt more than sufficient for almost any mainstream workload. Which leaves us with a question. If DDR4 was already this good, what needed to change? When DDR5 arrived, it didn't just increase speed, it changed the architecture. On the surface, the improvements looked familiar. Voltage dropped again, down to around 1.1 volts. Base speeds started at 4800 MHz, already far beyond standard DDR4. And like every generation before it, the notch position changed, meaning you needed a new motherboard and compatible CPU. But the real difference wasn't just frequency, it was structure. DDR5 introduced dual subchannels within each stick of memory. Instead of one 64-bit channel per module like DDR4, DDR5 effectively splits that into two independent 32-bit channels. In practical terms, this allows the memory to handle multiple data streams more efficiently, improving parallel workloads and reducing bottlenecks under heavy use. That's a meaningful architectural shift. DDR5 also integrated on-die error correction directly into the chip, not server-grade ECC in the traditional sense, but built-in error correction that improves stability during long workloads. Onboard power management also changed. Voltage regulation moved closer to the memory itself, giving motherboards one less thing to handle and improving stability. In short, DDR5 isn't just faster DDR4, it's smarter. Now, here's the important part for real-world use. If you're gaming at 1080p with a mid-range GPU, DDR5 won't magically double your frame rates. In many titles, the difference compared to fast DDR4 is small. But in CPU-heavy games, high-refresh competitive setups, video editing, 3D rendering, AI workloads, or extreme multitasking, DDR5 starts to stretch its legs, and capacity scaling is massive. Consumer modules already reach sizes that were once reserved for servers. For creators and professionals, that headroom matters. So the question isn't, is DDR5 better? Technically, yes. The real question is, do you need it? And that's where most people get confused, because RAM isn't just about buying the newest thing. It's about buying what fits your platform, your workload, and your upgrade path. Common misconceptions. Higher megahertz always equals better performance? Not necessarily. Latency and architecture matter too. More RAM always equals better results? Only up to a point. Memory prevents bottlenecks. It doesn't create performance out of thin air. If a workload needs 12 gigabytes and you have 16, the system runs smoothly. If you increase to 32, you gain headroom, not necessarily more frames per second. Understanding that distinction prevents unnecessary upgrades. Mixing RAM sticks doesn't always work as seamlessly as people assume. In some cases, it functions without issue, but often the system will default to the slowest module, and long-term stability is never guaranteed. And memory generations are not interchangeable. Each one uses different voltages, different signaling standards, and different physical layouts. RAM is tightly integrated with your motherboard and processor. It's not a standalone upgrade. It's part of a larger platform. Final thoughts. Looking back across all these generations, one thing stands out. DDR was never really about the numbers. It was about computers finally catching up to what we expected from them. Generation by generation, voltage dropped, latency tightened, channels split, and every time, software rushed to fill whatever headroom we created. So what's next? DDR6 is already on the roadmap. Projected around 2027, with speeds starting near 8,800 megatransfers per second and scaling well beyond that. Another architecture shift. Another new motherboard requirement. Another round of, do I actually need this? But here's the thing I've learned building systems for 20 years. The best upgrade isn't always the newest one. It's the one that fixes your actual bottleneck. And right now, for a lot of you, that bottleneck isn't RAM. It's storage. So in the next video, we're fixing that. SSDs. The different types, where they matter, and which upgrade will actually make your system feel faster. I'll see you in that one.